Hey there folks, Wrel here. In the background you'll see some gameplay from PlanetSide 2 as we talk about what I feel are significant issues when it comes to the new player experience. Since the last time a video was put out regarding the new player experience, the game has changed. It feels like there were some steps forward, some steps backwards, and some things that are just being addressed in a really roundabout sort of way. So we're going to go into this with the current state of the game in mind and offer up some suggestions on where to go from here. One of the things I think was a step backward is just that we now start from the map screen as soon as we log in. And unless you already play PlanetSide 2 and understand everything that's going on, in which case you just pull up the map first anyway, this is just a really ugly, very unappealing way to jump into a game. Any game, like unless it's Risk or something along those lines. Starting out in the warp gate like we used to means that you're immediately given a very real connection to your character and your faction. It also gives you a sense of safety where players know that they can retreat if they need to take a break, and it doesn't immediately overwhelm you with a bunch of blinking lights and countdown timers. The intention, of course, was just to give people, especially new players, a way to immediately jump into a battle, instead of just wandering around the warp gate until they open their key bindings and start to figure things out. But there are much better ways to do that. The first is to just start people off in the warp gate, again, and allow them to instantly redeploy while in the warp gate. So for veteran players, this does very little to actually change the game, because again, as it is on live, you log in, you stare at your map, you click deploy, and then boom, there you go. Veteran players also know enough to pull up their map and assess where they want to go anyway, so it's really not a big shift there. But for the new players, this is a big deal, because again, connection to your character and purpose is very powerful as far as giving people a good impression of the game. But you also want a way to get them into combat quickly. So my thoughts would be, as soon as the player enters the warp gate, they receive a mission to go through a teleporter, also conveniently located in the warp gate. This teleporter would do just one thing. It instantly redeploys you to a base where you are needed for defense. If there are no base defenses available, which would really be a rare occurrence, then it'll throw you into instant action instead. This starting mission would happen each time you log in until you're battle rank 20, which gives you a good amount of time to get a grasp on things, and of course, veteran players are just going to ignore the mission system per usual anyway, so it's not a huge shift. So that's the first idea. Warp gate, mission, redeploy through the teleporter.
Facility is secure.
A lot of times on Reddit, the forums, whatever else, you see people say that new players should immediately join up into a squad or a platoon whenever they log in. And this idea generally receives mixed opinions for good reason. I mean, after all, I know that most of the squads that I join are just terrible. They have no direction, no leadership, they have people just talking about whatever they had for breakfast, or no one will say anything at all. Or most importantly, it's just two guys that are on the other side of the map. If I'm in the middle of what turns out to be a big battle, I should be able to immediately squad up with players inside my hex. Players already doing the same thing that I am also doing. So that's part of the second idea. If I'm outside of the warp gate, pressing the insert key should squad me up with players who are in the same hex. And if there are no squads in the hex at the moment, then put me in a queue for that hex. And as soon as another player enters the queue, then you pair us up. Immediately you'd have a squad that works toward what you're doing right now and not what people are doing off somewhere else. The third idea is for someone who already understands the basics of map reading. Now, population numbers are a good way to know how many players are in a hex, but what they don't do is tell you the current state of the battle. A 50-50 split may seem like a good fight, but how many times have you spawned in just to find out that everyone in the hex is being spawn camped by liberators, main battle tanks, whatever. This is extremely annoying, and it's probably one of the most frustrating things about PlanetSide 2, because it works against the mentality that it should be easy to find a good fight. There's a reason why force multipliers are called force multipliers. A single player in a max unit is not on the same level as a single player outside of one, but that's how it's reported on the map. So if the easiest way to fix this is just to tack on a multiplier for every player inside a vehicle and then replace the pie chart, then let's do that. You could say that each player in an MBT is worth 3 points, each player in a Liberator worth 3, harassers are only worth 1, flashes only worth 1, ESFs worth 3, or something along those lines. And if you'd like things to be a little bit more granular, then you can make drivers cost more than gunners, etc. I know that people are going to be on about losing the number of infantry versus infantry, but honestly, that's not what PlanetSide 2 is about. And you'll still see a representation of how many allies versus how many enemies are fighting in the zone via the number ranges. I think another benefit to the solution is also that outfits will know exactly what they're dealing with before dropping into a hex. If an outfit sees a lot of force multipliers in a hex, then they know that they might want to start pulling vehicles and attack from outside the hex instead of just spawning in. Ultimately though, you want to give players enough information to avoid entering farmed out zones, and I think this would be a really good way to do that. The last thing that I would like to talk about is something that I've spoken on in the past, but it's in regards to power disparity and why we keep perpetuating it. PlanetSide 2 is so close to side grades that I'm not really sure why they haven't just followed through with what they already started. There's a food chain in PlanetSide 2, and I'm not talking about just galaxies eating liberators, eating ESFs or whatever. I'm talking about horizontally. If you have a stock Vanguard and an unskilled player, they're going to lose to a stock Vanguard and a skilled player. If you have an unskilled player with a sorted out Vanguard, the battle might go either way depending on what we're talking about, but a skilled player with a sorted vehicle is just going to crush everyone below them. I'm not talking about just Vanguards here, obviously, but everything. In infantry play, the line is a little bit more blurry because of the environment and the lower time to kill, but why is a player forced to start out utterly inferior to everyone else in a game that doesn't divide skilled and unskilled players? In classic MMOs, you have a leveling system that naturally moves more powerful players to areas where they're not constantly griefing the lower levels. It doesn't always work, but that's the intention. In PlanetSide 2, no such system exists. Now there is something to be said about progression. People like to earn stuff, they like to upgrade their gear, and that's understandable. But the cost of doing so is also really high. How many players are you losing because they can't compete? What irks me the most though, is that PlanetSide 2 isn't far off from eliminating the problem, and you can do so while still creating progression that people will enjoy. The difference though, is that the progression would need to be tailored not only toward individual playstyle, but also how players tend to evolve over time. The cert lines should be updated to reflect that. For example, a new player generally has poor aim, they can't move as well, and they don't have enough awareness to avoid explosives. So let's say that instead of the nanoweave and flak armor cert lines, we're going to combine them all. This is an example, by the way, so don't jump on my nuts about the specifics. But let's say that nanoweave armor now has 3 ranks total. The first rank of this nanoweave armor is actually going to be a half and half split. 10% damage reduction to small arms fire, and 25% damage reduction to explosives. Subsequent ranks are still unlocked one after another, but they don't upgrade the ability. Instead, they provide completely new options. So after nanoweave armor, you could unlock flexible nanoweave, which gives you 20% damage resistance to small arms, but nothing to explosives. And for the last rank, you could unlock hardened nanoweave, which is the full 50% explosive damage resistance, but has no small arms reduction. Or when it comes to things like abilities, instead of the heavy shield, you get nanite mesh generator, then resist shield, then adrenaline shield. This keeps in mind the player's evolutionary mindset. A new player isn't going to roll with a squad constantly, they're not going to have a medic at their back all the time, and they're not going to know when resist shield is actually going to benefit them. As players become more skilled, they might even stop at resist shield and not go for the adrenaline shield. They might just think that resist shield and nanite mesh is all that they need, and that's completely fine. But skilled slayers can also see adrenaline shield as a direct upgrade to nanite mesh just based on how quickly that they can kill things without taking too much damage in the process. So the progression makes sense. The same thing for infiltrators if you want to do hunter, stalker, and then nano armor. The point isn't for something to be better than something else. It's to not give someone a crappier version of something just to force them to make it better over time. When it comes to vehicles, you'd have to think of new versions of normal abilities, and let's use fire suppression as an example, at least on ESF. I'd give the normal fire suppression to players at the start, and then give them a sustained suppression later on, that would maybe remove the instant while on fire effect, but instead it would heal them over time. After that, you might get the combat fire suppression, which heals a large chunk of health instantly, provided you're already on fire, kinda like it used to, but it has no heal over time effect. So the mentality would be to give a good all-rounder to the beginning pilots, and when they start to get a little bit more savvy, they can unlock a version that they can use before they go on fire, and if they're an upper level pilot, they can go for the instant heal, which allows people to play mind games and such with their enemies, but needs to be used while you're on fire. But again, that's the general concept. The game is so close to side grades that it could just give abilities that tailor to specific playstyles, but it doesn't. Well, it does, but it also forces you to upgrade those abilities to be better in order to play on the same level as other players, which puts new players at a larger disadvantage than they need to be, and it keeps them out of the extremely expensive vehicle games entirely. With the guarantee of more new players thanks to the game being released on the PS4, it's probably a good idea that we start looking to address some of these issues in the coming days. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you're a newer player and just have something that gets you frustrated to no end, or if you're a veteran player and just remember some of the things that maybe kept you from having a good time, then leave those thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.